Sahana Vavatu, Sahanao Bhunaktu, Sahaviryang Karavavahe, Tejasvinavadhitamastu, Ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Okay, I will revise verse 25 again because it is an important verse that deals with the nature of Atma. And structure so far is that between verse 11 to about verse 30 or 29 plus minus, it talks about the nature of the jiva, the world, and the nature of your intrinsic nature, Atma. And then verse 30 onwards, we'll talk about duty and talk about karma yoga. So because we're close to duty and karma yoga, I want to give us one more revision of the nature of self using everything that we talked about and putting it together so that we don't switch out of this section with you still asking, yeah, but I missed something. I feel like I haven't captured everything you've explained. So this will be this session for that reason. So in verse 25, which I haven't chanted last week, we will do in this session, stated that what we take ourselves when we're born, I am as good as this person that I see myself. I am as good as the physical body, which we said is made of the 5 elements. And when I say 5 elements in Sanskrit, Pancha Mahabhuta, it is like the periodic table of elements model. However, it is much more comprehensive because the periodic table of elements in science includes just gases, liquids, and solids. However, the 5 elements model includes on top of those 3 space and time. So it is much more holistic method to look at the constituents that makes up this physical body. So this means that since this physical body is born, right, it came into being at some time, and you open your eyes with your 5 senses, and all you can see is arms and your mom and dad. You see, and you start to relate like this in this world. Like, as long as my eyes are open, my ears are open, whatever I see, I start to then relate. So all forms become very important in our life because you see that you can't live without going over to the fridge and finding a job, and you have to make friends, and you have to respect the teachers. You have to kind of you have to come together. So you very quickly learn that life becomes about dealing with forms. So thus, in that way, it becomes a normal thing to look at myself, my I, as a form this much. Now, we also said that beyond just your physical form, which is what the 5 elements are, these 5 elements also constitute your mind, which, as we can see here, includes, as we said, 4 general parts of your mind, which is your intellect, your mind, and your eye sense, but also the memory. So we'll put one more here, Chittam memory. So if we look at Chittam memory, it's very important because without memory, I couldn't teach this, you couldn't hold all of this information together. And this means that we need to have a relatively well put together memory so that it can connect the pieces of the puzzle of what we heard in the previous sessions and then bring that over and then say, well, didn't you say that before? So now you're saying something different. How do we therefore reconcile that? So besides memory, you also need the mind, the manas. The manas is 2 things. Number one, we say it is the emoting capacity. So if you think of something using your intellect, if you discover some solution, you have had a problem for a long time, and you broke through, you conquered through that thing that was bothering you, then it not only does it, come in a form of intelligence, but it comes with an emotional high attached to it. So this emotional high, right, is always connected to this buddhi, because it is through the emotions that you can recognize how much are your thoughts keeping with what needs to be done. So not only are emotions a form of attachment to your thoughts, but also your emotions become a doorway to let you know how much is your life keeping with and how congruent is it with what you need to do? So if you sort of get told, at work, for example, it's common, you get told something that you don't want to do, and you feel that, right? It's inside, you feel that in your body. So this is the emotional, but sometimes you can't really do much about it. So this is a whole different matter. But I just want to show you that not only is your thought always attached to an emotional high, but also an emotional high can be a doorway to let you know how congruent you are, thinking and operating in this world. And the ahamkara, so what happens is all of this, the intellect, the cognitive capacity to analyze, to calculate, to solve problems, to discover your nature, and the manas and the memory, all of that has to be owned by one entity. And that which owns it, that which the little kind of you can say it's a cup or a jar, it has to be inside one jar. And that which holds it all together and associates it to one individual is the ahamkara. Now, these four functions in the subtle body are also made of the same 5 elements that make up the physical body. So this is a common question or dispute in science, because science deals with the gross matter. And the gross matter is the easiest for the mind to deal with. The moment you bring subtle matter into that kind of a mind, what happens? Where is it? I can't measure it. If I can't see it, it's hocus pocus. So this means that in Vedanta, you need an even subtler mind than of a particular professional who's dealing with putting rockets to space or neuroscience and so on. So we're not putting them down, right? We're just saying that you need a certain kind of a mind to appreciate something subtler. Otherwise, the mind's going to say, I don't see it. Where is it? And it's going to constantly throw these objections into whatever the teacher says. It always finds one more objection to overlap it. So you can't really deal with this kind of a person until they've humbled themselves a little bit to recognize that whatever I've tried, there's more than meets the eye. Literally, there's more than meets the ears and the physical eye. So that way it has to take some time to unfold. Now, whatever your thoughts think, or however they think, suppose someone has an intellect that's highly analytical, or someone that's whose intellect is very artistic. We've got artistic people here, right? Or some intellects that work with numbers, or they're very mathematical, or some personalities that are more extroverted. They want to go out and get hands-on, right? Kinesthetical movement. So the reason for that is because of your samskaras. Samskaras are your impressions, past impressions that have been strongly imprinted through repetitive behavior. So what is it that develops your samskaras? Another name is vasana. Simple, repetitive behavior. So if I keep on responding to you or speaking or thinking in a certain way, I'm going to develop a disposition to do that more likely in the future. Therefore, that becomes your samskara. Now, we also said that whenever you do something, whenever a situation presents in your life, then you just sort of look at this situation, pleasant or unpleasant, and you win a jackpot and you just go like this. Cool, right? Or someone gives you a hard time and you just totally don't do anything, like go, You always act. So this means because you always act, you're always producing unseen results. As we said, the word unseen result is adrashta palam. So these unseen results, that means results that are yet to come to me. Of course, you will receive some immediate results if you respond, but most of them are unseen because the environment is not conducive to return the fullness of what you are to receive as a result of your response. So those unseens make up your karma. So this means when the person dies, right? In other words, you get an account called sanchita. So how does rebirth happen? We'll just tie this in while we're on the topic. So we all start with a account called sanchita karma, sanchita. So this means that when you're born, you get these two bodies, and one portion of this sanchita gets assigned to one life. And what gets assigned to one life specifically? Karma, that means your, right, what you are to experience in a form of pleasantness and unpleasantness in your life, but also the kind of person that you will be, generally the kind of personality. That's why you can have two kids born in the same family, given the same opportunity, but they will be very different in their personalities. Why? Specifically because of karma and samskaras. Now, when you get this one portion from this total pool of unseen results, that one pool, that one portion is called prarabdha karma. Okay, so prarabdha karma is going to then give you a given set of experiences to live out in this world. This is why you and I and everyone on earth has a particular life that we do right now. Why are some people born in one place, others are born in another place? Because wherever you're born, you're going to be given experiences consistent with the place with where you're born. If you're born in a more, lower class family, then your results and your life will be very consistent with that kind of birth. If you're born in a middle class family, then equally you'll be given a consistent kind of livelihood. However, not everyone is going to further get, if you're born in a middle class family, exactly the same, because you can be born in a middle class and others born in a middle class, but then within the family, you also get a certain sibling, and they may be your blessing or they may give you a very hard time. On top of that, one or the other parents may have some quirks, and those quirks will then get passed on to you. Now, why is it that one of the parents don't have those quirks and they pass a lot of good religious, spiritual principles onto their child, but then another middle-class family, one of the parents with a quirk passes on through the interaction, innocent, onto their child, and then the child has to work, which isn't pleasant. Suppose it's a negative quirk or some quirk that's not helpful. The child has to work for many years to come out of that. So this again, it shows you that even if I'm born in a middle-class family, I will be very differently experiencing my life than somebody else born in a middle class or a higher class or a lower class family. So this means, in this sense, this prarabdha, this one section of this total pool called your sanchita, is going to give you that kind of life. Now, when you receive in your life a certain kind of a result, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, then again, you don't just witness it. You're by your choice compelled to respond. By your response, what do? There's another section of unseen results added back into sanchita. So this means, now there's one little word that I want to add. Actually, in this life, right, when you do an action, those actions will become your unseen actions, unseen results of your actions will become what's called your agami karma. So you got sanchita, you got prarabdha, that's just one life, and agami is a result of all of the participations that you have done in this life. Now, not all agami spills into the sanchita, right, after death. Some of it gets played out in this life. So therefore you have to, which is natural, right? You become a CEO or something, and then you have to deal with the consequences. You have to deal with that. That is your sort of, as a result of your hard work. What's the unseen results? You were promoted in a very high position in the corporate society, in corporate structure. So now that becomes your new life. However, as a result of that promotion, you've now developed new friends, new opportunities, and those new opportunities and friends, they further sculpt you as a person because you've got it in a new position. Now, that further sculpture, you're again compelled to interact with those new kinds of people, new kinds of personalities, new kind of lifestyle, and that constantly shapes and shifts your personality. So it's constantly changing your samskara and your karma. Therefore, all of those results that are not experienced in this life as a result of you dealing with your prarabdha karma, all of those results are called agami. After death, that agami goes back into sanchita. So therefore, sanchita, one section prarabdha, You act, you act, you act, you generate new karma called agami. After that, that agami spills back into sanchita. So it's a constant cycle like this. And thereby, this is what that karma for you has brought you, the person that's the three bodies that you're wearing now, and what my karma has brought me right in this moment. So therefore, when we get born, getting back to the original thread, we take ourselves as good as these three bodies, the physical, the subtle, and the causal. And the reality is your real intrinsic nature, as we spoke about, which is Atma, self, it has a relationship because self is all pervasive. It's all throughout the whole thing, okay? So from any given standpoint, from your three bodies standpoint, there is a special relationship that self has in respect to the three bodies, okay? From this standpoint, there is a given relationship that what I meant to say self seemingly has, not that it has, but it seemingly has from this given standpoint. So just like, for example, right, your house, you have a relationship with your house, but do you say that the house is I? Right? Nobody does that. However, if you were wearing your house for a long time, you would probably start to mistaken it as I. If you were sort of carrying, like, if I say, let's do a little experiment. And I say, point everything in this room, in your room, that is not you. Okay, we don't need to now philosophize what is the word you. And you're in a room of very few objects, maybe just a pen and a phone. And you're going pen, phone, clothes. And I say, but what about your glasses? Ah, right? In other words, you've been wearing it it's so intimate, it's so close that one has totally missed out on their glasses. So in that same way, because the body and the mind is so intimately connected to your true nature, Atma, we innocently mistaken this Atma as, or these three bodies as Atma. Okay. Now the question is, what is Atma? And this is what verse 25 last week has talked about. And I'm going to chant it, unless you have something to say.
How is the connection between the gross body and the subtle body and the causal body? How does it change when a person is in meditation?
I'm saying when the person is when?
Meditation.
Okay, so the physical body, of course, remains. The subtle body becomes a little bit more like ripples in a lake, right? There's a lot of waves on the wave, on the
Does
water.
it become more obvious?
Not necessarily, because some people sit down in meditation and they lose it. All of the problems start to come in meditation. But ideally, it allows the ripples of the mind to settle down a little bit. Now, you actually don't need meditation specifically to settle down your mind. You can just use basic mindful walking. Some people like to sit down and relax. Other people like to move. So it doesn't really matter how you do it. The point of meditation is to settle down the overall amount of ripples in this mind. Because I'll give you a metaphor. Suppose you have three buckets. This is from Chandogya Upanishad example. And the sun is shining equally on three buckets. One of the buckets you were just shaking very recently, and you just leave it alone. The only thing in real life is we're constantly shaking our bucket, right? So the other bucket, now that bucket with shaky water, on top of that has very dirty water. The bucket in the middle has sort of murky water, but it's not shaken. And the bucket on the far right side, its water is very clear, but it's very shaky. Now you can have another bucket. We'll just go outside the example. We don't have to always stick with the Upanishad example strictly. Suppose now we have another bucket whose water is equally clear as the third bucket. However, it's not shaky at all. Okay, so now, which one will reflect the sun, which will reflect the nature of self the fullest?
The last.
The last bucket, right? So good. So in other words, right, even if you've got a very clear bucket, water bucket whose water is shaky, you can kind of make out the sun, but it's too hard. It's too distracting. It's very hard to do. So this means the point of meditation is to simply settle down the mind that tends to waver and think about different things in its life that it has to do. Because if you really analyze your thoughts, how many of those thoughts have any bearing in real life that you entertain in meditation, or concern for the future, or entertaining good old thoughts in the past? How many of them actually have any real transformative power in your life?
Early few minutes in the meditation, they interfere. But then later, when the mind settles down, it becomes a lot more calm.
It becomes a lot more calm. And furthermore, in Vedanta, there is meditation. Chapter 6 is a big part of that. But amongst that, through your constant contemplation and your nididhyasana, right, bringing this knowledge into your life, you naturally become a more peaceful, more calm person, because you recognize that, right, there is one order of reality about me that is going through all of this, but there's another order of reality that whose real nature is myself, and thereby you have a lot more objective stance towards life. As long as my I is totally identified with this, then right, I become a doer. I have to become, I have to do this, I have to be happy, I have to. Now, how many actions to make me, the body, happy? They're endless. So this means as long as my identity is in these three bodies, there's no chance of a truly peaceful, still bucket of water. There's no chance. Because even if you have a really advanced yogi who's meditating a long time, hours per day, if their I is still in the meditator, right, in the bodies that are meditating, basically the physical, the subtle, and the causal, that are meditating, then there will always be this in the back of the mind, this irk, this desire for attaining something. Now, that's something, you know how the mind is. As long as I don't have the full information, the mind's bothered by it. If I tell you a story and I say, once upon a time, there lived, like, yeah, finish the story, please. See, so the mind wants to finish the story. So if the yogi is sitting down, right, and their mind wants to finish the search, the mind's not going to rest until it finishes the search, until it finds its nature, until it finds the truth. And thereby, no matter what you do, no matter how much meditation you have, the mind is not going to be at peace. And so what do you have to do? You have to artificially maintain your meditation every day for hours a day. And the moment you stop, you feel it. I talked about my story in the last course of, I used to be a big time meditator from Kriya Yoga. We know Kriya Yoga, what's his Yogananda, right? So I got initiated into 5 lineages. It just tells you how desperate I was. 5 lineages, 5 different people, different techniques. And I was basically meditating for about 13 hours a day. And I also said that I didn't have to work because I was self-employed. So this gave me a lot of hours per day to meditate, 13 hours per day, doing all sorts of Kriya Yoga techniques. And it basically felt like bliss, no doubt. But the cost that came is the moment I don't do it, the contrast between the normal mind, the everyday mind, and that blissed out mind, that sattvic mind, as we call in Sanskrit, that sattvic mind, it is like day and night. And so you say, there's no way, I don't want this ordinary mind, give me that mind. So now what does enlightenment become? It becomes a constant hard work for maintaining the subtle body. Just one of the 3 bodies in one of the 3 states, in the waking state. So this means the person's nowhere near to moksha. They're just maintaining something that by its nature is meant to fluctuate. So in overall, yes, meditation plays an important part. However, the point is not to be overly concerned with your mind, because the mind is designed to change, but to recognize despite the changes, despite the chaos, despite the challenges, I remain completely, I remain free of the whole thing, but the body and the mind has to do its part in this world while it's alive. So that alone gives you that composure that's why we say the wise person has samatvam or samachittatvam, equanimity in and through normal endeavors of the day.
But then, Andre, all of us are yearning. The biggest challenge is to have a glimpse of the causal body. or exist for a while in the causal body, call it astral or whatever. But then, how can we connect with the causal body while being alive?
Let's go back to, I'll answer that. Let's just go back to the purpose of Vedanta. Vedanta is fascinating, right? It's got so much prakriyas and teachings and so on. And we can go two ways in Vedanta. One of the ways is to start teaching you about all of these mithya forms, right? The causal, the subtle, and the physical, and start to explore the details within details. Or I can, as Vedanta is intended originally, I can show you that the whole purpose of this teaching is just to get a general understanding of it. And then by recognizing now what this person is made of, then I want to show you the final reality, which is the real you. This, leave alone. This has been going on since beginningless time, and it will not stop. Until the person attains moksha, this will keep on going. Okay? So this means that the whole purpose of Vedanta is to show you that your nature, as such, it has nothing to do with the three bodies. That is moksha. So as long as I have to kind of be a little bit, details are fine, and I love details, but also have to remind us that it's not to know all of these 5 elements and 10,000 Sanskrit words, but just to generally recognize, right, your nature, and then to flow with life as life was meant to flow, right? Because how much knowledge do you and I have end of the day in respect to all knowledge and all power? It's minuscule.
Minuscule.
It's minuscule. So, yeah, I remember it was great, to get into all of this, and when I first got into it, was like so fascinating. But the more we contemplate, the more you realize, my God, this is still fascinating, but it's just how it is. That's how the setup is. This is the setup. You're looking at Ishvara setup right here. How long has this setup been going on? Beginningless.
Infinity. Yeah.
It never began. It was timelessly backwards. So this is amazing Ishvara system. And not only that, but when Vedanta comes into your life, you also recognize that even devas in higher worlds, lokas, they have the exact same system, just more subtler. So our physical body is a lot more gross than one of Indra, Agni, Vayu, and so on, right? In different worlds. That's why we're subject to gravity. We can't jump very much. And our memories can't really remember that much. But there are different worlds, lokas, in which you can just do so many more things. Why? Because these things are much subtler. The causal body is exactly the same, but the subtle body and especially the physical body is a lot subtler. And thereby, through that, you can live for 1,000,000 years and so on. But the point is, the deva is still stuck with 3 bodies. And what's the point of Vedanta? To shift my identity from this, which I've been beginninglessly fascinated with in every way imaginable. Wearing a physical body of a female, of a male, of a deva, of a child, of a troublemaker, of a saint, of everyone. The whole point of this is just to shift identity, and then you've solved the problem.
So if you're able to, by good fortune or blessings, in the causal body, I've heard that time and space can disappear.
So causal body is, for now, it is...
Unlike in sleep.
Yeah. So causal body for now is all of specifically your unseen results and all of the past impressions. Even if a yogi identifies with the causal body, they're identified with ignorance, because this causal body is what gives you a new physical body, right? And even in nirvikalpa samadhi, you eventually return from here, you return back into the physical world. So now what have I done? I've just escaped these 2 bodies temporarily in nirvikalpa samadhi, and I've gotten a little glimpse, and now I'm back. There was a story, and I'll move on, right? There was a story of a yogi whose student came up, and it was a different story. Yeah, okay. The student came up and the yogi said, go fetch me water. Go fetch me water from the lake. And while the student went to the lake, the yogi fell into nirvikalpa samadhi. Now, the student came back and he couldn't get the yogi out because he was so deep into it. He was where? He was identified with the causal body, right? Just non-dual potential, right? It's just potential. And long story short, the student died, everyone died. The yogi remained in nirvikalpa samadhi for how long? 1,000 years. This is a story. Don't ask me how is that possible. 1,000 years. Where was this yogi? Here, causal body. He woke up and he goes, oh, where's my student? Where's my student? And he realized it's 1,000 years later. What happened? Nothing. He just got 1,000 years respite from his ignorance. He just took a pause. You know what? I don't know who I am. I'm just going to, otherwise he wouldn't go in Nirvikalpa Samadhi for so long. Let me just go into Nirvikalpa Samadhi for 1,000 years, forget about all problems, and I'll come back and I still have to figure out who I am. So causal body, subtle body, physical body, it is mithya. And this mithya, right, you have to understand its relationship to you, the real self, which I will do now in this.
Thank you, Andre.
Hey, Andre, I have a question. So I know you don't want to stay in the causal body too much, but your personality is there. So I like chocolate ice cream versus vanilla ice cream. That's in your causal body?
That can, not necessarily, because that can also be developed in your childhood. And that becomes what's called in modern psychology, your unconscious. So unconscious is those memories that I don't have access to right now, but they still changed my responses and my preferences in this life. So you can't really quite tell why is it that you like, something bigger than an ice cream, like the Gita or music. You can't really tell whether it's because your parents sort of inspired you or because you brought a musical personality along with you from the past life. It's always a mixture of both. Yeah. Otherwise,
Okay.
small things like that, you develop throughout your in this life, and it becomes your unconscious memory, the same memory where childhood impressions get stored. And that also can, form into different kinds of things like abandonment issues. I'm not loved. I'm not good enough. I'm unworthy. All of these things are actually unconscious memory, the same place where ice cream is stored. The preference.
Thank you.
Gary?
I'm going to try to keep this real quick, but when you were doing the meditation, I know in meditation, I've been like dealing with different methods, to quieten, the physical body, laying still, not moving. And then, the mind and the intellect, like doing like koans, the sound of one hand clapping because your intellect is logical. And so you try to think of illogical things. Did you have any techniques that you used dealing with the causal body as you meditated?
Okay, but I'm not sure. Why would you deal with the causal body? What benefit would that bring you? So,
I don't know, but you were talking about that there'd always be vritti, these
right. Okay. So
waves of motion.
yeah. So the way you deal with your thoughts, repetitive thoughts, is you have to physically abhyasa, right, through constant practice, stop them, intercept them, and so to train the mind, because the mind is going to directly influence your habits. So you actually influence your causal body through your mind, through your physical body, right? So every time a thought comes, say no, stop. Like I choose to intercept this judgmental thinking. I choose to intercept judging myself or putting an opinion about who I am and what I am, how I'm not good enough, how there are people better than me and how they're not good enough, and how that politician's like this and how my mom's like that and my brother and sisters are like that. You have to intentionally intercept that, and that affects your habits. It affects your causal body, your samskaras.
So you try to do a technique above and beyond what you're doing to quieten your intellect and your mind.
No, I think you're talking about meditation now, right?
Yes.
See, in meditation, I said last week, Saguna Brahma Vishaya, right? Manasavya Paraha. So the point of meditation is to contemplate on your nature, to relate with Ishvara, to not only relate with Ishvara, that's one aspect of meditation, of Vedantic meditation, which I will talk about later. But the second aspect is to bring all of your unresolved bitterness and all of those things that keep on playing back like a tape recorder, on and on and on and on. And they just don't want to go away. And you know that you shouldn't have them, but they keep on coming anyway. So meditation is actually a perfect time to let that surface. And then when it surfaces, then you can, right, invoke a prayer. And you say, please help me to release this, Lord Shiva, help me to release this pattern which keeps on coming and bothering me on and on, because I am clearly unable to stop it. And
it's kind of a mind technique.
It's a prayer. It's a technique. We call it a prayer. And through this, you're asking Ishvara, you're acknowledging your helplessness. Because if you had control over your mind, truly, we talk about mind control, then everyone by now would have a perfectly bright, well-trained, wonderful mind to hang out with. But few of us can say that. Few of us can attest to that. Why? Because you've got, that whole pool of your habits are just dripping down like a waterfall constantly. How do I prove this? Easy. Do you know your thought 5 minutes from now? You see this? Look at this. We think we know ourselves, and yet there's something about me whose part I don't know what is going to deliver in 5 minutes from now. That part is the causal body. So this means that part is going to give me a certain, thing, certain response, certain perception about the situation. I don't know what it is, but it's there. So this means the only way, Carrie, to affect those troublesome samskaras that are repetitive in nature is when you're triggered. That's when you're closest to the causal body's samskara. And in that moment, I can immediately look at the situation differently, in a different kind of light, and reframe it. I can, for example, say, if someone is rude to me, I can say, see, this person, they're doing the best they can in this moment. But do they have all the facts about me in this moment for them to make this kind of an opinion about you?
Andre?
Wait, no, they don't have all the facts. Number two, there's a story, for example, of a woman who was born with a sibling, and her sister got more attention than she. And she found that she didn't get all of the love she needed from her father. So what happened is, when she got married, then in her attempt to get her husband to pay attention to her, she pushed her husband away. But at the same time, her kid, in the attempt to give her child the love that she lacked, that her father didn't give her, she ended up pushing her son away because she was giving too much attention, too much love, too much nurturing to her child. So now what does she do? She can, number one, she can just keep on complaining on and on and on, or she can say, look, this has happened, but now I'm an adult and I have the full capacity in my right to change this. I can look at the situation like this. I can say that my father came with his own pain, and he was born in very hard times, and you can't hurt someone unless you're in pain. There's a phrase that says, hurt people hurt. Right? So whenever someone, whether intentionally or unintentionally, wants to hurt me or hurt you, there is most likely they're coming from their own projections, which is arising out of their own pain, which is arising out of unresolved emotions from their childhood, unconscious memory, as I told to Bobby, or from their samskaras. Number two, she said, my father didn't love me, but who loved me? Well, I never thought of it like this. I was only focusing on the bad things. My mom loved me. My auntie loved me. My uncle loved me.
Yeah.
Did my father have all the facts? No, he didn't. He didn't have all of the facts about me, because he couldn't see my causal body. His causal body was different. His personality was different to mine. So when he saw my personality, he was like, no, you should be like this. You should be an accountant, a doctor, go and do this. And that made me feel not approved, not loved, unworthy. So he didn't have all the facts. Through this, I can accommodate that fact. So this means she has the capacity, like we all have, to look at our samskaras that drip down in a form of discouraging thoughts and repetitive stories, and you have the ability to change them through deliberate intervention. So this deliberate intervention is what your prerogative as a human being is. Little by little, we can change the impulse of these samskaras, right, to constantly shape your life. So you have to, at one moment, intercept and say, no, I'm going to take control of my life.
Thank you for revising that for me. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Andre, in every meditation, Ishvara or God is a component.
Yes.
Right? And then to make it more secular, let me use the word, recently heard the word prapancha.
Which means world, yeah.
Yeah. How does prapancha or God or Ishvara respond to you in your prayer? Because you're submitting a petition to God. Okay, help me get out of this.
Yeah.
So, is it okay to expect a response, or is it a futile exercise?
Good question. So if you pray, the question is, first of all, no, you cannot quite expect a certain response because the field is too complex. There are too many people, everyone's got their own desires. So how is now, right, why am I so special to have my, right, desire absolutely fulfilled? So you cannot quite expect a categorical yes to it. Number two, how does a prayer affect the whole field? Well, prayer is an action, and every action has to have some reaction, has to have an effect. So what you're doing is, through prayer, you're acknowledging there are many unknown variables in your life. That's a fact. You don't know what's going to come tomorrow. Yeah. And by that, I feel helpless or I feel fearful. But there is one tool given to me that I can affect those unknown variables in my favor. And that tool is a prayer. So through a prayer, I can ask for a certain, future to be in my favor for, helping and for being more contributive and for more giving. But I can also ask these patterns that are unconscious and these samskaras to weaken their hold on me. So through prayer, as Swami Dayananda, right, my teacher's teacher says very nicely, he says, the last resort that you have when all fails, when you've done all of the actions and you've apologized and you've done all of the possible solution mode and it all failed, your last resort after which you have no further control is a prayer. So prayer is that last resort that I can put into the field through repetition, of course, because the idea is the more I pray, the longer, more effort I put into the field, the more likely that prayer, the more I will affect those unknown variables. So just a 1 second prayer, how much worth of unknown variables will you affect with a 1 second prayer?
Nothing.
Almost nothing, right? So this is why yajna in the Vedic culture involves the Agni and throwing different oblations into it and delivering different things into it. Why? Because not because it's all so grandiose and flamboyant, but because it requires time to sit down. It requires time to memorize those mantras. It requires time to, as a participant, to sit there and wait for like 40 minutes, right? 40 minutes for it to finish. So in that sense, it's got a much larger contribution in your favor when you apply longer time to your prayer.
There's a lot of confusion when it comes to prayer, especially with the people who are following Advaita Vedanta. Because when you pray to somebody, there's a sense of duality. And Advaita Vedanta is finally getting into non-duality. Right. So, there's this duality. I just take 1 minute to explain, because when I, as an Advaitin, am praying, there is something bothering me that I am going away from my basic teaching that I am non-dual in nature. However, I am submitting to somebody who's different. So I feel that, the way to go to Brahm, Nirvikar, Brahm, Nirakar, Nirgun Brahm is through Sagun Brahm only, because that is the only instrument that I have in sleep to get out of the sleep. There is no other instrument other than Gyan. Gyan will happen when it will, when it will, the curtain will come down. But before the curtain has come down, there is this one more aspect that we have is the prayer to the Sagun Brahm.
Yeah.
We should use it to go to the Nirgun.
That's
We
true.
already know that the finality is Nirgun Brahm, but we have not yet touched it. So we must use the tool that helps us to go there.
This is true understanding, and you cannot pray to the formless because formless doesn't have ears to hear. It doesn't have it. What are you going to say to the formless? You are the formless. In other words, the only way to understand the formless is through praying to Ishvara, because Ishvara is your intermediary. This is a difference between Neo-Vedanta and Advaita Vedanta. In Neo-Vedanta, the most important intermediary aspect, which is Ishvara, it's completely stripped. It's not complete, but it's stripped out. And the irony is you absolutely cannot, and I'll show you why, the logics later on, why you absolutely cannot capture the final reality, Brahman, without Ishvara. Ishvara is the only way through which you can understand the fullness of non-duality. The only way. Ishvara becomes, even after moksha, becomes your, because look at this, Ishvara has taken you across the ocean of so much seeking and so much looking. Who has done that? None other than Ishvara. So even after moksha, then the person becomes even more devotional. This is why I would say in the Gita that the jnani, the wise person, is my biggest devotee, because the jnani has crossed the ocean. Why? Because I've been sent the pramana, the methodology, the guru, the patience. How many people have patience to sit down and listen before their mind goes, oh, what's this? Rubbish. Next, give me a technique.
Yeah, it's the Shankaracharya who's written Bhaj Govindam.
Right, and Adi Shankara was such a devotee. He was, an amazing devotee, because Ishvara does not contradict Brahman. Remember, everything resolves into Brahman. So, but I can't pray to Brahman because Brahman is a formless. You can only pray to something that is a form. Therefore, now Ishvara is not a form. Ishvara is knowledge and power. But I will explain this later. But yes, you pray to Ishvara because Ishvara is the one that saves you, the one that delivers you the guru, the one that delivers you the pramana.
For me, there's this ongoing inquiry into, it's almost like there's different contexts. It seems that for me, there's a contradiction where we're utilizing that which is moving to realize that which isn't, for the want of better words. So, for example, knowing that we are not that which is moving, yet it continues. As far as I can tell, everything continues as is. So everything on your diagram behind you and Ishvara, etc. My query is, how does that look when one attempts to leave recognizing that there is this singular experience going on, and to continue leading a dharmic life, when that can sometimes be contrary to what it can appear to be contrary to what is, I don't know how to coin it, but what is also meant to happen via the infinitum of intellect that I'm not aware of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
So back to the story with Arjuna and that, where he had to kill his family or friends and stuff, that kind of conundrum. I'm not sure if what I'm saying is coming out very clear, but I find there's something around that I keep getting tripped up on.
Well, first of all, it's not a pre-written script. So see, Al Gore in 2001 plus minus was asked by a student, what will happen to our climate in 100 years from now? And Al Gore said, I don't know. It depends on what we do. So first of all, even Ishvara, if Ishvara were to be a person and come into a form, and you ask Ishvara, what's going to happen to our humanity in 100 years from now? Are we all going to be replaced by robots? You will say, I don't know. It depends on what you do with the information that you have, because everyone's a contributor. Even you will attribute to the next 100 years, big time. Second of all, so in other words, first of all, you cannot quite put a pre-written script onto anything, what's going to happen. Ishvara gives this world and it gives you potential. That's what Ishvara is, potential. And you can collapse whatever potential you want. You can become a great musician, a great singer, a great teacher, a great philosopher, a great anything, a great painter, a nurse, a doctor, a programmer. Or I can, out of all of that, say, I choose to collapse the highest potential, which Ishvara has given me, which is to understand that me and Ishvara enjoy the same reality, which is Brahman. That's the highest potential that I can collapse. Now, in so doing, you can't collapse that if your mind is still driven by likes and dislikes. That's where your question of, sort of fishy adharmic acts come in. I can't do this because my mind wants to go, left, go right. It wants to do all different things. But when it comes to the work, you can't just now, you have to come to a certain place and say, my likes and dislikes are fine. You're not going to get rid of them. But I have to now subserve my drive, my pursuit of Ishvara. And this means that I have to now transform all of these likes and dislikes for getting it my way and whatever I can do no longer. At one point, the person says, not that they say, but they come to a natural, organic understanding that the price is too high. If I continue getting my likes and dislikes satisfied, it is like a pit. It has no ending. There's always going to be one more thing to pursue, one more thing to chase, one more dollar to make. So the person organically recognizes the limitations of artha, security, kama, pleasures, and dharma being good. So even being good is absolutely crucial to make money and for your pleasures. But some people stop at being good. And even that has limitations. Because if you're good, then you become basically intolerable towards other people. You say, my standards are so high and no one else is following Dharma as much as I am, therefore I become judgmental now. And number two, by being very good, the other limitation is that you see that I'm not being compensated enough. I am a good person. I'm following the scriptures to the word, and I'm not getting these unseen results that are promised by the scriptures. And yet those who are cutting corners are absolutely getting their way left and right. So the person basically, by turning even Dharma into the final goal, becomes not necessarily emotionally, they may be good, right, in terms of their actions, but they don't necessarily become an emotionally stable person because they see they're not being compensated enough. And two, that it's no one else is following Dharma, and so they become very judgmental potentially. So in this case, you have to now look at, Dharma. What's the final goal? The Dharma is only a means to moksha. So this means now I have to bring Dharma into my life and security and pleasures. Because if you don't have pleasures and you're pursuing spirituality 24/7, what's going to happen? You're going to go crazy, right? So bored, right? It's like, give me some variety in life. I have to be naughty, mischievous, once in a while, like Krishna, right? I have to go out and be a fool a little bit and so on. So there's a variety in life. So, but now I understand it's not just for the sake of pleasing myself. It is all to maintain sanity, to maintain composure and keep my mind engaged and sharp so that it becomes a means to an end, which is moksha. So this means now, through this understanding, I have no choice when it comes to moksha. I am just, through understanding, going to do what is to be done for the sake of preserving that calmness and peace and understanding and empathy of the human heart, so that I need to do what needs to be done. Otherwise, you're going to get thrown for a ride, left and right. So this is not something that's advice, Ishvara telling you or Krishna telling you, be dharmic. Is this what we're saying? Telling you what to do? Suggestions? Be dharmic, man. You got to be dharmic. No, it's giving you an understanding. If I don't do what is to be done, then there is a price to pay. The consequences are going to, right, affect my state of mind, and they're going to be very unpleasant in the future. So it's in my interest to do what is to be done.
I just want to be really clear with that one. Thank you, by the way, for responding for me. That can be anything, as you say. It's not predetermined. It can be anything. It's got nothing necessarily to do with the concept around Dharma. It is just happening out of my control.
You are given 3 powers to exercise: power to do, to think, and to desire. And these 3 powers, as a human being, need to be taken responsibly, used responsibly, so that I can help myself. Because nobody who wants to suffer, who's living to suffer, you see? But then why are we pursuing one more thing when they're going to bring just suffering, when they're no longer in our life? Because the person thinks that that's the only method you've been doing for a long time, right? I'm going to get one more thing. It's going to give me a little bit of happiness. The seeker and the sought are going to merge. And what's going to happen? Then all of this wanter, this person who wants and needs, is going to subside for a moment. And what's going to come through, right? My natural state, my natural joy, my natural happiness is going to come through. But then it's very temporary, that resolution of seeker and sought. And thereby the person says, I'm no longer interested in resolving the seeker and the sought, the wanter and the wanted, temporarily, because it never lasts. And so what is moksha? The seeker and the sought, the subject and the object, they permanently merge. They permanently are understood to be nothing but mithya. Verse 25, I'm going to finish. Avyaktoyam achintyoyam avikaryoyam uchyate tasma devam viditvainam na nusho chittum arhasi.
This self is said to be unmanifest, not an object of thought and not subject to change. Therefore, knowing this, you ought not to grieve.
Okay. So I want to complete this teaching on what is Atma. So let's talk about the nature of you. So it's Atma has no attributes. And it says that Atma, self, is avyakta, it's unmanifest. So this means when something is unmanifest, is this manifest? Yes. Why? Because you perceive it. So whatever you perceive is manifest. So when it says avyakta, it is not an object of perception. It is not any particular object. So this means if I try to turn self into some object, some experience, something that can be like a light. I've heard this in yoga, right? You see the light, or you raise your kundalini. All are these things perceived? Yes, they are. That's why we talk about them, right? We said you're going to raise some energy is going to get risen up. Is this thing perceived? Is this thing felt? That's what I mean by perceived. Absolutely. That's why they say, you know, there was some heat. Heat was rising up. Is this thing perceived? Yes. Not Atma. It is achintya. It is not an object of thought. So this means that it is not something that I can ever think in the future, because objects, thoughts always come in time. For example, right now, I can say, look at this. What is your name? Your name comes up. Where was that name before I asked the question? It was not there. So even something that is so familiar to your mind has to be summoned. But awareness never needs to be summoned. Some awareness, the conscious being, was there all along, in whose presence a memory of your name just came by. Who awared that memory? I, Brahman, Atma. Therefore, it is not an object of thought, but it is the self-evident consciousness in whose presence thoughts come, memories come, and then they go. Where's your name now? Now that I mentioned it, it came back to you, right? That's the whole point. So things come and go, but awareness remains. And awareness, Atma, is avikarya. It is not subject to change. In other words, why is awareness not subject to change? Would someone like to answer this?
Change comes with time, and the truth of time and space is Atma.
Excellent. And anything in time is subject to modification. Time modifies. Right now, gone. Replaced by
Awareness is
right now.
awareness is eternal.
It's eternal, right? And thereby awareness not being born in time, it is unborn, it is not subject to modification. So this means, will your awareness, look at this. So I want enlightenment, I want this reality of Atma to be more enlightened tomorrow. Not going to happen, because that's a change. So this means there's never a time when your Atma is not already complete. It's already complete right now. It will never be more complete tomorrow. It will never be more expanded, more full, more purnam, right? Tomorrow. It's always going to be as is right now. So this will never be a time in your life when awareness will be different. Are you aware right now? Now, like, what does the individual want? Do they want to be more aware tomorrow? I mean, you can be more aware of intelligence tomorrow, of things that you've read in books, but there's awareness of that intelligence. So intelligence is going to change, but awareness is going to remain exactly the same how it is right now. I don't understand this. Suppose, right? I don't understand this right now. What enabled that thought to be known? Awareness. Suppose you say, come on, let's all together say, I don't understand this right now. I don't understand this right now. I'm never going to get this. This is totally not making sense. Were you aware of those thoughts? What was aware of those thoughts? The final reality was aware of those thoughts. It's simple as that. Okay? Now, the question is, what is the relationship between thought, the world, and awareness, Atma? What is the relationship between thought, world, and Atma? The relationship is a Satya-Mithya relationship. What does this mean? And this is the essence of non-duality. So, first of all, let's define, what does Satyam mean? Satya means that which is independent. It is self-existing. It doesn't depend on anything else for its existence. It is self-supporting. It doesn't rely on anything else for it to be what it is. And Mithya means its existence is contingent on the content. That means its beingness depends on the content of something else. So it is dependent on Satyam. So if Satyam is independent, Mithya becomes dependent. And therefore, Mithya cannot be without Satyam. It's contingent on the presence of Satyam. Now, let's look at a simple example, and then we will apply it to ourselves. Let's take a simple desk and look at the relationship. So here we have two things initially. It seems like I have both a table and I have the wood. So upon analysis, I come to see that there is only wood. So initially, right, I kind of give the reality to this table and I give reality to this wood. But I have to ask you a question. If I ask you the question, what is real? Is the table real or is the wood real? If I ask you this simple question, you will say, yeah, both are real because I see the table and I see the wood. But then to turn it into a more philosophical, into a more Vedantic argument, you have to insert one more word. What is more real? The table, the word more, the table or the wood? And you say wood. Now, why do you say wood? Because your intellect, your buddhi, understands that if I take out the wood, there's no table. If I take out the table, that means if I collapse the legs of the table, the wood remains exactly what it was before. So in this sense, there is only wood. There's no table here. But then why do I call it table? Why, it's kind of a contradicting thing now. Are you messing with us? Like, it is a table. But then why do I call it table if there's actually no table here? Because you have to now, right, further inquiry, because I have to distinguish this wooden object from a different wooden object. If a little, a statue or a cup or a plate, then I have to say this is for transactional reasons, a table, and I have a plate and I have a cup. So even though all three are made of the same substance, right? They're all mithya, but all the mithyas resolve into their final truth, which is the same, one and the same truth, which is the wood. So this means that anywhere here, where can I not find the wood throughout this? Where is wood not? So this means no matter how much I look, for eons I can meditate upon this. It's a very simple fact. The whole thing is made out of wood. So in other words, the table's existence resides or is pervaded by the content. The content here, the wood, is satyam, which means independent, and the table is mithya, which means dependent. So this means that no matter where I look, at the edges or at the top, at the bottom, at the left or the right, the whole thing will have wood, right? I'm never going to be away from the wood. So now this table can start to sort of look for the wood elsewhere. And the irony is, the more it looks for elsewhere, the farther away it gets from what it already is right now. So now this means that again, the entirety of this form, does this form have to destroy itself to get to the wood? No. If it destroys itself to get to the wood, then it's basically wasted its time, right? It just sort of, it's going to get a chance next lifetime, is going to become another table, no problems there. But it doesn't have to do anything. Do you see the difference between doing and knowledge? So now, what is the table going to do to get to the wood? What meditation is it going to possibly do? What imagination is going to do? It cannot do anything. It has to understand wherever there is table, wherever there is form, that's exactly where wood is. The table is never away from the wood. The wood pervading the entirety of this table remains free of the life of the table. The table can die. It can cut its legs off. The wood remains exactly the same. The only thing that's changed is the name, which wasn't real to begin with. It was just a name. In other words, it was just wood obtaining as a table for a short amount of time for the sake of transactional reasons. Gautam?
Can we say wherever there's a form, there's a formless?
Wherever there, for now, we're not there yet. Wherever there is a form, wherever there is mithya, that's exactly where you will find satyam. So I don't need to look anywhere away from this, because this is the only thing you will ever find. Everything is here right now. The whole existence is in this. Now, let's apply this to the whole universe. Now, what do we say in Vedanta? Awareness is, you always have to start from the highest. You have to assert the final reality. Awareness, and then you use logic to get there. So we don't just make statements. So we start out by saying that awareness is the final reality. Awareness in a form, existence, which is of the nature of awareness, which has no second. That's what limitless means. It doesn't have a second existence awareness. It is one of itself, like space. Space here is exactly the same as space throughout the entire universe. So awareness being the final reality. Now, what collapses into awareness? Well, the whole thing, time, space, and objects. But how to understand this? Well, let's look at, for example, the table. We'll take the table and we'll say the table resolves into the wood. The wood, so now the wood becomes satya, the table becomes mithya. Now, the table, the wood resolves into, right, lignin and cellulose. That's what makes up the wood. So now lignin and cellulose becomes satyam, and the wood becomes mithya. But then you say, then what is cellulose and lignin made of? What constitutes it? Well, atoms. We can go smaller, but we don't have to go that complex. Now, atoms become satyam and table becomes mithya. Now look at it, and the wood becomes mithya, and the lignin becomes mithya, and the cellulose becomes mithya. But look at this. You don't have to just look at the table. The very same atoms that make up these molecules that make up the wood are the very same atoms that make up your limbs, your physical limbs right now. Your heart is made of the exact same atoms that make up this table. Atom is always going to be an atom, just going to have different amount of neutrons and electrons in itself, but it's still going to be an atom. So look at this. You have an atom. Does an atom inhere attributes of the wood? No, because if an atom had attributes of the wood, then it could not be your limb. If an atom had attributes of the cellulose, it could not be, right, something else that makes up, that atoms can make up. So what does this mean? Satyam always remains free of the attributes of mithya. So the wood remains free of table attributes. That's why the wood can be also a cup, can be a little, whatever it is. But then, right, atom is not only free of the table, it's also free of the wood and the lignin and the cellulose. Make sense so far? So now, if you go further, you resolve the atoms, doesn't matter. Maybe in science we will discover something even smaller than strings or quarks. But let's stop at quarks. Now, right, quarks make up atoms. So now the quark is free of the atom, free of the electron, free of the proton, free of the cellulose, free of the lignin, free of the wood, free of the table. So you can see what's happening. The smaller we go down, every level down is free of the attributes of the level up. Okay? And now this is where science stops, right? They say that we don't know what is after quarks. Now, this is specifically where you need Vedanta. Vedanta now says, ultimately, you can't have, just because you have quark, does it mean there's nothing after it? Just because you have a quark, does it mean that's the final? No, why? Because logically, you can never have an effect without a cause. But what's the issue in science? We don't know what's the cause of the quark. So what does Vedanta do? It fills the answer. It says the cause of the quark, or whatever the smallest next upwards is concepts. Because you cannot put together anything that's intelligently having a relationship to something else unless it's arising out of an intelligent cause. Therefore, the intelligent cause, concepts become the cause of the effects that science talks about, all the way from quark, all the way to the table. So this means that intelligence is free of, and intelligence is Ishvara, by the way, intelligence is free of the quark, free of the atom, free of the proton, the neutron, the lignin, the cellulose, free of the table, free of the wood. So what are you looking at right here? Are you looking at a table, or the wood, or the atom, or the lignin, or the cellulose, or the proton, neutron, electron, quark? What are you looking at here? I'm looking at them all at the same time. Where's the question of discarding anything? I'm just cognitively understanding that I cannot find the table. It's actually wood. But I can't find, upon analysis, the wood. It's actually lignin and cellulose. Upon analysis, I can't find the lignin and cellulose. Where is it? Because if I look under a microscope, it's just strands of a bunch of molecules and atoms. But I can't find an atom. If I look even closer, it's just basically a proton and neutron revolving around in an orbit of space. And if I look into a bunch of, proton and neutron, I can't find anything tangible. So I can't find a final building block in this universe. And then intelligence, the Vedanta comes in and says, there is a final building block of the universe, which science is not able to come to yet. Why? Because we need, as scientists, something concrete to see. But is intelligence concrete? No. What about your mind? It's exactly the same. If all of this reduces to concepts, That means the whole world is made out of concepts, intelligence, which appears to me as forms that I'm talking about and interacting with. What about your thoughts? Are they not concepts? Exactly the same. And Vedanta then closes the final equation. It says, concepts itself, their being rests in awareness. How do you show this? Easy. You can show it right now in your experience. Where is your own concept, your own thought, without an awareful being? Now, let's bring this down. What are the implications of this teaching in my real life? What does this mean? First of all, as I said, wherever there is mithya in this world, I can look at anything now. Wherever there is mithya, that's where Satyam is. Is this an experience or is this knowledge? It's knowledge. So I'm cognitively seeing through things, through my buddhi, the one because of which you understand all that is here is resolving into concepts. And concepts have no reality without awareness. Awareness thus becomes the final Satyam. So this means the wave. Does the wave have to transcend itself to know the water? It's silly. Does the wave have to transcend itself to know the water? What? If it does that, it's what? It can only do it in imagination. It can only establish water as some imaginative reality and go, I've escaped from myself, the water, and I've created another bubble in my mind, and I've established myself in there. This is what goes on in spirituality. People live in a bubble. They turn the final reality into a bubble. The wave understands cognitively, wherever I, the form, you see what the word I means now? Wherever I, the form is, with these three bodies, that's exactly where intelligence is. And wherever intelligence is, that's exactly where the final Satyam is, which is known to me right now as self-evident conscious I. Therefore, Mithya is never away from Satyam. This body is never away from the final reality. My thought is never away from the final reality. Do I have to, does a thought displace me awareness? If it did, that means when a thought comes, the conscious one of that thought would go out of existence. Does that happen? It never happens. Wherever thought is, the content of that thought is intelligence. The content of intelligence resolves into awareness. And then the verse finished off by saying, what are the implications of knowing this in reference to grief, in reference to hardships that are going to come in life, like, your employer, employee, and friends and kids. Sometimes they're naughty, and spouse is not, with you 100%. How do we relate with this? Well, first of all, knowing Atma doesn't mean escaping human experience. Knowing the table doesn't mean escaping the wood. Human experience is there. I can't stop it. So this means by knowing this reality, it softens the cushion. It softens the blows of life, because I recognize that a lot of things can happen to my mind, to my body, to my life, but nothing can really touch the final Satyam into which it all resolves, which is myself as a awareful being. So you're not escaping any human experience. You're not kind of stopping desires and being totally detached from the world. What are you being detached from? The whole world is Ishvara. Look at this. What do we hear? Get away from the world. What world? Show me where is world. If I analyze the world, which I'm trying to get away from, it's nothing but concepts, Ishvara. Lorena?
I think it also helps you put the correct value on things.
Exactly.
So in a practical manner. Yeah.
It practically makes you just, do what is to be done without getting too caught up, because now I'm not taking forms to be the absolute reality. In fact, Krishna says here, Shochitum na arhasi. In fact, na arhasi means, more literally, Arjuna, you don't qualify to be sad. This is a strong statement. Hey, you don't qualify to be so sad about what is happening in front of you. You don't qualify. Because by doing so, you're not really bringing this whole picture of Satya-Mithya into the mix. The truth of all of these soldiers, and you and me, Krishna, myself, Krishna, the whole thing is awareness. The whole thing is Ishvara. It's all happening within Ishvara's order. Understanding this, you actually don't qualify to be as sad as you are. You can still grieve, of course. We're not denying human experience, but there's a certain objectivity, a certain composure owing to the knowledge. Now, suppose Arjuna says, oh, Krishna, it doesn't matter. I'm not grieving for Atma. I'm grieving for my loved ones. I am grieving for Drona and Bhishma. I can't shake hands with Atma. I can't hug Satchidananda Atma. Now, you think Krishna, if he heard this objection, that he would let Arjuna through? Maybe if you were polite, maybe you would go, okay, I understand where you're coming from. That's okay. I'll give you some pity. But Krishna is not this kind of person. He says what needs to be said. And he says to Arjuna, Arjuna, even if you are grieving for anatma, anatma is mithya, that means its form, even if you're grieving for anatma, it's totally useless, end of the day, in the big picture. It sounds a little bit kind of like strong words, but it's actually useless. Why? Because anatma is either nityam or anityam. Nityam is permanent, or is anityam impermanent. Now, anatma can't be nityam, permanent. Why? Because that would put it in the same order of reality as awareness. And what do we say about awareness? Well, it is not thinkable, it is unmanifest, it is not changing. And you're grieving towards that which is changing, that which is perceivable, and that which is thinkable about. So anatma cannot be nityam, cannot be permanent. So that puts you on the only other category, Arjuna, because there's only two things. There's eternal and non-eternal. So therefore you have to then be grieving for anitya, non-eternal. Now, if it's non-eternal, then the truth of what non-eternal is mithya. And mithya is always subject to change, is subject to grief, is subject to 6 stages. It goes through jayate, born, vartate, grows, right? Viparinamate, reaches its peak, apakshiyate, declines, vinashyati, it ends. So make up your mind, Arjuna. What are you grieving for? Are you grieving for nityam, that which is eternal? And if you are, it doesn't make sense to grieve for that because it is eternal. It's never going to go away. So you can only be grieving for anityam, that which is not eternal. In that case, you need to understand the nature of that which is not eternal, is meant to die, is meant to go through cycles of creation, is meant to end, can't stop it. So this much you can accept. And then Arjuna thinks about this carefully. And in the next verse, what does he do? He says, this is wonderful class, Mr. Krishna. However, it still went a little bit over my head. I still feel like grieving. I can't quite get myself to connect, even to Satya-Mithya. I still need to grieve for my mom or dad or my brother and sister and Drona and Bhishma. Please help me out to change my relationship further without going too technical into Satya and Mithya. Bring it more down to something relatable. And this we will do next week, by bringing the change of your relationship to destruction, which is a fundamental force in the universe, because of which your ignorance is removed, our ignorance is removed, because of which you're able to grow, to thrive, to get rid of old notions, to get rid of old patterns. So therefore, we need to change our relationship from fear towards destruction into one of bringing it gladly into our life. Because if you think about it, all beautiful things happen because of all ugly things go away. They all get slowly diminished, and I, open up new chapters in my life. Therefore, this comes next week. Purnamadav, Purnamidam, Purnat, Purnamudachyate, Purnasya, Purnamadaya, Purnam eva avashishyate. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.